a lifetime in a country we could never call our...
When I first got into musicals, when I was like 15 or 16 years old, I first started writing a Wuthering Heights musical, which was inspired by me watching the old movie with Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon and falling in love with that and thinking that this is really romantic and this is really moving and gosh, you know, I love this and this is what I want to write a musical about. And my brother, who had been kind of my critic along the way while I was working on it, the only person that I actually let listen to anything, he also had a very good piece of advice. He said, it's good, but there's nothing redeeming that happens at the end of this story, nothing that would send you out of the theater, you know, feeling anything but really down. And he was right, and I decided that I needed to find something that had a little more uplifting quality to it. And I had seen A Tale of Two Cities. I'd seen the movie version when I was like 12 years old, and remembered being really moved by this story. And then my mother also suggested that I go back to A Tale of Two Cities, which was a book she'd read in high school. I went and got the book, A Tale of Two Cities, and I was surprised that I loved the book as much as I loved the movie in a different way. Because there's so many things that are different about it, and of course with Dickens and the writing, you know, it's more about the writing and the language and the storytelling. And I found all sorts of other things to respond to in the book, as well as the movie, and I kind of knew that I had found something that I could really stay interested in, because always the hallmark of whether something works for me or not is, does it make me cry? You know, I love to laugh at things, but if something moves me, that's very powerful to me, and I wanted to work on something where I had hopefully the potential to move other people. The thing that drew me most into the story was the character of Sidney Carton. That was the thing that kept me most interested, was that character, because I felt like you could keep discovering or even creating new things about him. And I think the reason I identified with him the most was that I was sort of, in my mind, a female teenage Sidney Carton, because what he is primarily is the outcast, the loner, you know, the weird kid, and I was the weird kid.
Surely for the moon, look in the faces of your children, and you cannot turn away. Tomorrow's dawning, can you see it? The world the way it ought to be.
There are so many themes that one can take away from it. There's, you know, the basic struggle of love versus hate, and love being stronger than hate ultimately in the end, and the idea of the power of forgiveness over the destructive power of revenge, which runs through the whole piece. But it took me many years to really be able to key on one thing that I think it's about, at least for me, and that I think the musical is clearly about, which is family. And you know, the importance of making that connection, even if it's not with blood relatives, but people needing someone to love and be loved by, and needing a place to belong. And Sidney Carton is an orphan, basically, who is adopted by and adopts this family. And by the end of the story, he goes from being someone who has no responsibility, doesn't take responsibility for anything, himself or others, to taking, you know, the greatest responsibility you can, and taking responsibility for the welfare and the rescue of this family that he loves. So he makes this amazing journey from someone who's really sort of worthless to someone who is more worthy than, you know, any of us can hope to be. And so that ultimate redemption, I think, lies at the core of the story. I came straight out of college and had a job at a talent agency for a couple of years here in New York City. And then I convinced my parents that I should take some time off and actually try to write the show, because all I had was, a few songs. And they very graciously agreed and were extremely supportive and said, yeah, you can take some time off. You can take 3 months and write the show. And I had no idea how long it would really logistically take to do something like that, but I took it and ran with it. And actually, at the end of the 3 months, I did have a first draft of the script and basically all of the songs written. And then I went looking for a real job again. And then I finally landed, one of my temp jobs turned into a full-time job at Showtime in cable TV. And I did development there for almost 13 years and was working on the show on the side, on the weekends, spare time. That was 12 and a half years. And I left Showtime right at the time that we were going into pre-production for our first production. I think the most major change I made was to really focus on Sidney as the protagonist and the main character, because in the book you don't know he's the protagonist until near the end, where he really starts to drive the engine of the plot. And in a musical, it's generally thought that you need to have, a lead character to key into, and the audience needs to know who they're following. The other thing was creating a relationship, more of a relationship between Sidney and Lucy, who is the woman he loves, who in the book he doesn't really interact that much at all with. And in the show, they have much more of a friendly relationship, and you kind of see more how she reaches out to him and helps him to change. There's probably a reason why I waited to do the book, because taking A Tale of Two Cities and distilling it into a musical theater form is, well, some people have suggested it was tantamount to, suicide, because there's so much in that book. I mean, there's so much of a social and political aspect that you want to include as much as you can. And with a musical, though, you basically do have to distill it down to a clear story and hopefully a protagonist or a set of protagonists to follow. So I found the hardest thing was trying to figure out what to cut without cutting out the heart of anything. And that's why really realizing that focusing on Sidney and focusing on the love story between these three people, basically, and this family was the way to go, and that anything else that didn't move the plot along or reveal something about those characters really couldn't stay. Well, the process always for me has been music first. So I'd write the music, and then the lyrics came after, and then actually with this show, the book came last, which is sort of not in the order that it's ordinarily done. But this for me started as a hobby, as a project of just writing a couple of songs, a few songs, inspired by the story. In my mind, I'd had scenes when I'd written the songs, so it wasn't like I found that I had songs that there was no place for, though some of them ultimately went by the wayside in the end. But I would still start with the music always, and then you'd get to a place in the script where you feel this is where a character can sing. This is where a character has said all he should say, and now the emotions are heightened enough that he needs to, or she needs to sing. And then if I had pre-existing music, I'd write a lyric to it, or in many cases just wrote a brand new song. Like Out of Sight, Out of Mind was a song that I wrote once I had decided to write the whole show. And that came at a very specific point in the story where I really felt Madame Defarge needed to express something. When I was like 6, 7, 8, 9, I started getting really into old movies, Hollywood movies from the 1930s and 40s. And they had these tremendous German and Austrian and Eastern European composers who had come over as Nazi Germany was starting to form. They fled to Hollywood, and they would have been the great romantic composers of their day in Europe. They came to Hollywood and started writing magnificent movie music, and I fell in love with the music. The most important thing to do, I think, if you want to be a playwright, is to see plays, is to read plays, and to try to analyze what it is that is working in the plays that you see that you feel work. You know, what is it in the structure? What does the writer do in developing the characters and telling the story? And you should try to emulate what you see that is successful. There's, you know, everyone who is successful is emulating someone somewhere along the line. They are inspired by other work that they've seen, and it's the best way to learn, I think, is really to see theater, to really listen to, you know, cast albums if you want to write music, and listen to as much as you can. They say that a musical is never, it's not written, it's rewritten, and even once it's been done, like Tale has been done now in two separate theatrical productions, I still don't think it's completely done in my mind. I would love to, you know, dig back in and change some things, because I think you can always be improving a show. Even when a show's Broadway run ends, theater exists every time someone produces it, and so the show has already been produced several times since Broadway, and my hope is it'll be produced hundreds and ultimately thousands of times in the future, all around the world.